Welcome to our first show. Today, Father Joe Evanko, pastor at St. Jude's Parish in Mountaintop, and Kylie Ballinger, so our Echo apprentice from St. Jude's, will talk about their faith journey today. So let's get started and get to it. So Father Joe and Kylie, so thank you. Do you want to talk about a little bit how we started doing this video?
We can. So when Kylie first arrived, a little less than a year ago, and one of the several things we talked about what she would be doing, we came up with the adult faith formation. So Kylie and I did several, and the first one we did, I kind of chose because I picked Bishop Barron, who, as many people know, is a social media guy or a media guru, if you will. And in the midst of that, and I think in one of the other sessions that we did, it also came up that people were watching Father Mike Schmidt, who Kylie is a big fan of, who is a younger version of Bishop Barron that's more exciting and deals particularly with the young adults, with all due respect to Bishop Barron. But anyway, I recently saw that they were both doing keynotes at a conference. And Bishop Barron's brother actually was the interviewer at the time, and they just did a simple interview where they talked about their experiences from their own lives and being from different generations. And in the midst of, many people have told Kylie and I that we banter back and forth pretty well in the adult faith formation. And I thought, well, they were kind of bantering back and forth, and they represent different generations, so Kylie and I do in terms of church and faith. So why not do something similar? So that's kind of how we got to where we are, and thinking that it would only not just eventually be Kylie and I, but we have other staff members and other people in the parish do similar things.
Great.
Yeah, and it fell into place really easily because this whole year we did have this kind of banter back and forth about Father Mike Schmitz and Bishop Barron, but we'd also talked about with like engaging using different mediums and like having podcasts or videos or different things like that to kind of enrich the way that we have ministry. And so it kind of fell together pretty easily to then do a video that modeled after these two people that we'd kind of been following all year. And so it kind of just came together pretty easily after that once we saw the video of them too.
Great. So when they watch the video, they will review it and let you know how you did.
Hopefully, we'll see if they watch our video.
So let's get into this. So Father Joe and Kylie, can you just tell us a little bit about your role here in the parish? Whoever wants to start first.
Sure. So I, like you said, I'm the Echo apprentice. This is my first year here at St. Jude. So I started in August. And I've kind of had many different roles just trying to get a full experience of ministry. So I've helped out, like Father Joe said, with adult faith formation, but I also work with the young adults in the parish and trying to start kind of a young adult community with that, working with the young family ministry as well, and then helping out with different other ministries that we have, with youth ministry, religious education, RCIA, bereavement support, stuff like that. So this year has really just been kind of me getting exposed to all the different ministries and getting kind of used to the way that a parish works and runs and kind of getting exposed to that. So I wouldn't say I have one specific role, but just kind of getting involved in all those different ministries throughout the year.
Great, you're doing a great job.
Can I say I don't have one specific role? Probably not, but obviously my main role is being pastor, which is ever evolving and developing even after 30 years of being a priest. And I think what's happened more recently is that role is being redefined. One, because of COVID and trying to figure out how we reach out to people still dealing with COVID and hopefully coming out of it. The other is reaching out to different generations, which obviously Kylie is a big part of and parish life is a big part of. And also multiple parishes and the diocese being involved in restructuring on a pretty much continual basis, which I think will be a big part of who we are as time goes forward in a very hopeful way. So the role being pastor now, I think, is a little bit more far-reaching and defined in different ways than maybe traditionally in the past. And I think to sum that up, though, the biggest role of the pastor is to trying to figure out how we can reach out to as many people as possible to spread the good news of the kingdom of God and and to use social media, which we're just scratching the surface with. And so people like Bishop Barron and Father Mike Schmitz, we're trying to use them as models and how we could do that on a local level to enliven the faith in people.
Great. So, and I'm going to go on with social media you were talking about. So do you think that going through that pandemic, that this is a good thing that came out of it? Just to having that social media, that extra arm too.
Do you want me to go first?
I can take a stab at it. I think it's a tricky line to walk. I think it's hard. I think obviously we saw in the pandemic it was a gift to have that due to our circumstances of we were all very isolated and that was our only kind of means of connection, especially during the pandemic. And so I think we saw a lot of gifts that came from and can come from social media. I always struggle to know the role that social media can play. I think it does have some positive aspects, like you're saying, of like we get to watch these videos from these priests that like have, you know, these different backgrounds and have these different perspectives, and I've obviously been affected by that and have enjoyed kind of that participation with social media. But then there's also always the negative side that comes to social media of it does, now that we are coming back together physically, it can sometimes keep us more apart, or it can, we've seen had negative effects with teens and different stuff like that. So I think for me, it's always a fine line to walk with social media of knowing when it's best to use it and when it actually does provide a lot of fruit to use it, and when it's better to just strive for in-person communication. Because I do think ideally like the best way to go is always person to person. You always want to have face-to-face connection, but there are a lot of different connections that we can make more than just the people in our area too that social media helps out with. So yeah, I don't know, I think it's a fine line to walk, that it can be beneficial, but you have to be careful when using it to not lean too much on that. That would be my answer.
I would agree with Kylie on the reality that there is a good and a bad, or there's something very healthy and inviting about it, but also very challenging where we have to be careful. Even before the pandemic, I remember having conversations with you and other staff members about, okay, so with these particular generations, this is what they're doing and how they're learning, and as you know, they instantly just go on the web and trying to get an instant answer. Well, how can we do that, but in a way that's more personable? So that's kind of the goal for me. And I think social media does allow us to do that, but always keeping in mind, if you can bring people in through social media, you eventually want them in the church, in the pew, and in front of each other, because that's what it's about. It's about having that one-on-one contact, or within the community experience, which you cannot, no matter how great we are or how advanced we get technologically, you cannot have that face-to-face, eye-to-eye experience unless you are present to each other, literally in the same room together.
Okay, good. So Father Joe, so you talking about like the social media and stuff. When you started in the priesthood, there really wasn't that issue of social media in terms of technology and stuff. So that brings me to the question about getting back to vocations and your faith journey. So when did you get your call from God? Was there a moment that you can pinpoint and say that is when you knew you wanted to be a priest?
Well, let me take a shot at a double answer there. The reality of when I was first ordained is most parishes, community naturally happened. So you didn't have to work as hard at it. In the last 15 years from me or so, we have to work much harder at creating community. So that kind of ties together with what you're saying. So when I think back about where my vocation comes from, I grew up in basically a traditional neighborhood kind of parish where everybody was mostly Catholic. Everything we did, every social event, whether it was a sporting event or a dance or church or whatever, it all revolved around the parish. And that's how most of the parishes in this neck of the woods were at the time. And that has changed. And obviously the cultures have changed, which is good and invites all of us learning new about what it really means to be a Catholic Christian, and the fact that we break down those barriers. And so building community now that's different from me is where we got to go beyond ourselves as a parish. A parish is never really a parish till we reach beyond ourselves. Whereas when I first was ordained and where my vocation came from, it was much more tight-knit and a smaller experience. So I think that all was very positive, but we're still trying to figure out how to do.
Right, great. So Kylie, so how about you? Let's talk about your experience, how you decided that you wanted to work in your faith. You know, maybe a little fresher in your mind for you than it would be for Father Joe, but just let us know how that happened.
So it is interesting talking about kind of community and how that has affected both of our faith journeys, because when I grew up not in a super tight-knit Catholic community, and we eventually, when we came to the faith, I was in high school and we would drive 20 minutes to get to our parish. So it wasn't like this thing that was kind of all-encompassing of my life and my neighborhood, and everything that I did was around kind of my Catholic friends and stuff like that. So it is interesting even just in that to look at the contrast of those different Catholic communities. But with that being said, the parish that we did attend when I was in high school, I think that probably had the biggest impact on my faith journey and beginning to kind of have these ideas and thoughts that I wanted to work for the church in some capacity. I don't remember why or what, but I remember my youth minister had a really strong impact on me, as well as a small group leader that I had in high school. And I remember seeing him who worked for the church and her who worked like a normal just 9-to-5 job, not with the church. And I remember thinking I didn't want to do that. I just remember being so drawn to I don't think that I could work this 9-to-5 and still have the faith that I wanted. Not that that's totally possible to do, but for me personally, I felt called to go and work for the church. And so I remember kind of in high school having those thoughts begin to kind of come into my life, and then they were definitely developed throughout my time in college and with my experience with campus ministry. So there wasn't one specific moment I would say, but I think kind of having that experience in high school and seeing my youth minister and really kind of being more inspired by him and the way that he lived out his life, and then having that kind of formed more in college led me to wanting to continue to kind of work for the church in that capacity.
Great, thank you. So for both of you, could you tell us, and now you already kind of talked about it a little bit, but what are some of the major external influences that helped guide your decision to your vocation choice? So you were saying your youth pastor, but...
Yeah, I think for sure my youth minister played a huge role. I think for me, it was definitely the contrast of I didn't grow up very Catholic, and so having that contrast to then experiencing the faith and having a bit of a conversion back to the faith through my youth ministry program, I think that was probably the biggest external factor of being in. We just had a very wonderful, lively youth ministry and program, and getting to see not only my friends, but also see kind of these adults and mentors that I looked up to live out the faith was definitely the biggest external factor into why I even continued to practice my faith, but also probably why I wanted to work in the church as well. And then in college too, that kind of similar line of thought of just having a lot of different mentors and friends and community that worked in the church and also didn't, but being able to be surrounded by them and have that kind of in my life has kind of pushed me towards that. So I definitely think community and mentors are the biggest external factors for me.
Great. Father.
You're making me think back. I've had many external support systems and guidance along the way. As I listen to Kylie, one of the things that is very real when both of us speak is it all happens in the context of relationship. Mm-hmm. And for me, my vocation came in the context of my family and of my parish, but really specifically, my family was so involved in parish life that when I was growing up, there was a pastor and 2 or 3 assistants, so there was always 3 or 4 priests around it, and there were some Father Mike Schmidt type guys back then, and so I got to see them on a very real, everyday basis. They had standing invitations to my home from my parents for dinner, so there, would not be surprising. I'd come home from basketball practice and there was a priest at the table, which like at first was like, and various times, depending upon my age, was really good or not good. But anyway, so I got to see that very, as Kylie and I talked about in some adult formation stuff, that sacredness, that holiness in the midst of very ordinary everyday experiences like sitting down around a table. And I think that was a big key for me, and in those relationships, so that's where my vocation kind of came from and continues to come from. And so now again, I hate to use this phrase again, but it's ever evolving. In working with Kylie in the whole ECHO program, basically I had to get trained as a mentor again, which I was kind of resistant, as we all are when we get a little older, like what am I going to learn now about this? And having other staff members, seminarians, things like that. But it was one of the best things for me because it brought spirit and energy and renewed me in how we go about what we do and how our vocations are multi-leveled and multi-generational, and that we got to do more stuff like this. So the conversations, Kylie and I have a mentor meeting every Monday, and it goes on for quite a while because we kind of go off track a little bit about whether it's just kind of talking about life and how life and faith are connected, or very specific issues that the people we're working with may have. So it all goes back to the relationship thing and being in person. And the old definition from my time, ministry is a sense of presence. If you have the ministry of presence, then things are going to happen.
Right, great. So, and again, you do seem to feed off of one another. So what have you learned from one another, just since you've been in the ECHO apprentice program, which we will talk about in a little bit. But what have you learned from Father Joe in terms of your faith?
Yeah. So many.
I'm going to take a drink of water.
Where to
This is your
start?
next.
Yeah. No, I think one of the biggest things, and kind of what he pointed on, was to see how he approaches ministry and to see like the full integration of ministry to life. Like I think that was a concept I already maybe knew conceptually, but to see that played out with the way that he lives his life, but also like ministers to people, was very helpful just to see this balance, but also integration between just like personal life and ministry, and more so not as separate things, but just how to live our life as a minister. And I think that was really helpful for me to be able to see tangibly in someone else's life of how that could play out for me if I continue to work for the church, and see how he kind of approaches and having those different relationships with parishioners, and having even being the priest that is now at people's houses, and like having those types of relationships and being very integrated into the community that he serves, and seeing the like benefit and the fruit that comes from that. So I think that would probably be the biggest thing at first that comes to mind, of just this full integration of life and ministry, that he like exudes very well, and has these different relationships with those parishioners, but still has the pastor relationship. So I think that balance that he's been able to have over and cultivate over the years is something that I definitely strive to embody and learn from him in that way. But we'll see what he says about me.
Can you call my spiritual director and tell him?
Yeah. We'll see if I can think of some more
Send the
things.
video.
I think one of the first things I think about learning from Kylie is that, my background is about living the question and asking the question and wrestling with stuff, and that's where you find eventually the answers. And it's really that journey. And I'm learning from Kylie that you have to really make, nowadays more than ever, conscious choices to be faithful, to practice your faith. I'm trying not to use the word intentional, because Kylie kind of always busts me the fact that
I said it once, and now he says it all the time.
And I have to say, I had heard that before, but Kylie kind of brought it to life for me, that particularly her generation, at least what I'm learning through her and the other people she's working with, is we have to do things very intentionally to make those conscious choices. And that's all great stuff. That's really good stuff. And so that's kind of a new way of looking at how ministry happens and how parish happens, and that has been a challenge for me, and it's helped me make better choices because of that.
I think too though that like illustrates the beauty of having the multi-generation, because if you're too far intentional and you everything is just very strictly intentional, that's really not a helpful way to live either. But if like you're too far not, so I think it's helpful to have the balance and the interplay between us to kind of balance that out and kind of have a more holistic approach and add each of our different opinions in these conversations to form a more well-balanced approach than just leaning too far to one side or too far to the other side. So I think that's also been helpful in our relationship too, is to have this balance from our different backgrounds and different generational backgrounds as well. So
Hey now, Kylie, talking about differences and backgrounds, the big question. So how do you reconcile you being an Ohio State fan while you're ministering in a very Penn State parish and being a grad student at Notre Dame?
Yes, great question. I won't say that I wore scarlet on purpose, but it does help. It is funny because we've talked about this because I kept it very quiet for the first, not very quiet, but I was kind of scared to tell people that I was an Ohio State fan because I knew it was Penn State country and I was like, I need to be accepted in the parish. I need people to like me. So it was funny because for a while I didn't really let.
That killed me, by the way. I wanted to let it out of the bag right away, but I
He respected my. So I built up some relationships first, and then I ruined them all by telling him I was Ohio State. I mean, to answer the question very quickly, I would say it's easy to reconcile it when you're the Ohio State fan because they always win. So that's how I reconcile it. Not sure how that'll do with all the Penn State parishioners and the Penn State interviewer. But that's how I at least reconcile it because we usually end up on top.
See, I feel compelled to say that, from a Penn State or a Notre Dame standpoint, is we have to have the conversation about how any of those schools really do what they do and how they win. And maybe we'll learn a lot about the true nature of the schools.
We meet a lot of true natures from a lot of schools that come out. We don't want to start that conversation.
Okay, now we're going to move on. So Kylie, talk
Yes.
about you are a Notre Dame grad student with through the ECHO program that Notre Dame has. Could you explain what ECHO is, what your schedule looks like, that sort of thing?
Yes. So ECHO is a graduate program through the University of Notre Dame where we receive a master's in theology over the span of 2 years. But in order for it's not just a normal master's program where you go to school for the 2 years during the school semester, but instead we go to Notre Dame's campus during the summer. So we're in classes for 6 weeks, on campus for 8 weeks, for 2 summers, and then we get assigned a placement. So basically we get assigned a place for field experience. So we get a ministry role and different stuff like that. So they partner with different dioceses, and then they match you up with the parishes and specifically with the mentors at the parish. So before the program and before I got placed, we kind of had different tests we had to take or interviews and stuff like that so that the ECHO staff could align us to be a mentor-mentee relationship, and which we have seen has helped to have that happen. And then they assign you to a parish. And so then you get those 2 school years at the same parish to get the ministry experience, which I have seen and understand why the program does this, because ministry needs to be applied. We can learn so much in the classroom, and that has been a real gift to be able to receive kind of those classes and that more academic knowledge. But ultimately it has to be applied and kind of put hands-on experience with. And so that's why they send us to the different parishes. And then we also live in community with other ECHO students. So I have 2 other roommates that are with the Diocese of Scranton and work at different parishes in the diocese, and then we all live together as well.
Great.
So there's a lot of different aspects. There's the communal, the academic, and then the ministry aspect.
And when is the academic part of it? When are you taking the class?
Yes, so we take 4 classes in the summer over those 6 weeks, and then we take classes during the school year as well. So while I'm working, I'm in online classes, but the summer is in-person classes at Notre Dame. Yes, right? At Notre Dame. So on campus, we live in the dorm. There's 60 other people in the program. 30 in our year and 30 in the year above or below, depending on what year we're in. So we're all together in the dorms, taking most of the same classes. So most of the students in our classes are filled with other ECHO students, as well as like MA students or different kind of graduate students as well. But yeah, we're all together in the summer.
About how many students?
60
total. Oh,
So-
that you said 30 and 30, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they're expanding, so they're trying, I think, to expand that number. But yeah, about 30 and 30 in every year.
Father Joe, how did you hear about the ECHO program, and how did we get Kylie into our parish?
Well, I first knew about the ACE program, which is a similar program that's been around longer from Notre Dame, which is where the students in getting their degree teach in Catholic schools. And I believe ECHO kind of came from that as a process. And so Shannon Kowalski, the Director of Youth Ministry for the diocese, who's studying a graduate degree out there, really investigated the ECHO program and started talking about it to Bishop Ambera in the diocese. And so when I heard that that was happening, I did my own research from being a Notre Dame fan, reaching out to one of my friends who at the time was the director of admissions, and he knew the director of the program, and so we started talking about the whole thing, and I had talked to Colleen, the director of the program, before all this, and so it's pretty clear it's something I think would be good for the parish. And so when the diocese finally made the commitment with Notre Dame, we had to apply. And so I had to fill this, I say it may not have been 20 pages, but I had to describe the parish, which was it's really a hard thing to do, to sit down and do that, to get a sense, give them a sense of what the parish was like. And then also I had to do a description of how I see myself as mentor. And then they used that with what Kylie put together, and that's how it kind of went from there. So that was a quick version of it, but it's been more than I could have hoped for. That my simple goal was, it was going to bring a lot of new life and spirit. Not that I was putting all that pressure on whoever was coming, or Kylie herself, but just I think to have someone who is in the midst of still studying and living out their faith, to come into a parish that really has no connection to the parish, I think it brings a breath of fresh air for those of us that may have gotten a little stagnant in our faith and the way we approach things and things like that. So.
She brought donuts for Easter.
Yes, coffee and donuts for Easter.
Which we haven't
That's
done
my
before,
biggest
so
accomplishment.
We will be remembered for donuts.
There we go.
So Kylie, since you are almost halfway through your ECHO apprenticeship, has this helped you form any ideas of where you would like to go in the future after you graduate?
Yes, the question of what to do after ECHO. Yes and no. I don't think I have a full kind of plan or idea of what specifically I want to do, but I really chose this program because I wanted parish experience. I had a lot of experience with college campus ministry as a student, but I knew I wanted to kind of see what parish life would be like, and see if that would be also kind of a avenue that I wanted to pursue. So I think in that way, it's just been really helpful to get different ministry experience, to be immersed in a parish and see what parish life and parish ministry looks like. I don't know if that's, I don't necessarily know what that means. Like, I still don't know what path I'm gonna take afterwards, but I think it's just helpful to have gotten such like a wide lens of what I could do, instead of, I think going into this, I was very kind of like, oh, I'll be youth minister. That's like what you do in parish, you know, you be youth minister. So I think it's been helpful to get such a wide lens of what parish life and parish ministry could look like. And that, I think, as I more seriously discern coming into the fall what specific job and role I want to have after ECHO, it will be very helpful to have gotten this different experience and being exposed to all these different ministries. So don't have an answer yet, but I do, yes, it has been a very helpful experience to kind of get exposed to it and start to discern what path the Lord is asking me to go on.
And that's good to know for anyone out there that's in college, just to know that you can change. You can, there's so much to do, and it may not be what you're thinking of in the beginning.
You're not going to ask me what I'm going to do with the rest of my life?
I'm not to you yet. So we are actually going to go back and talk about way back when you started when you started in the seminary, and what, like, say there's someone out there that's thinking about it, and so what was the process of becoming a priest? So just kind of go through that. Were there any interesting stories when you were in the seminary?
Oh, I'm
that you're
sure
allowed to
there
tell
were.
us?
I was
Yeah,
shy,
they're loud.
shy, quiet, innocent. No. Well, let me just do the practical stuff first. I mean, any gentleman that's interested in becoming a priest, reality is you have to have an undergraduate degree, whatever that may be in. And then after that, you will need some theology and philosophy that's prep work for the theology degree. So usually you end up doing a year or two of what's called pre-theology, and then after that, 4 years of theology. So it's really 4 to 6 years after you have your degree, and whatever it may be, depending upon what prerequisites you need. So that's kind of the practical end of it. But I think the more important end of it is just to be open to God. I mean, one of the earlier questions that I didn't quite answer is there was no specific time that I could tell you that I remember being called. I grew up in it. It was just something I was considering. And there were times that I felt called, and there were times that I definitely hung up. And then there were times where I answered, and I got so gung-ho that maybe I wasn't dealing with certain issues I needed to deal with at those times. So it's an ongoing process. What I would say to anybody is, whether it's priesthood or any vocation in life, whether it's marriage or ministry in general, is to just open yourself up to God, and not look for that direct call, but just open yourself up to God, because there's going to be direction there, either in your internal reality in your relationship with God, or usually through other people. Mm-hmm. And that's going to change. I mean, even for myself, I went to a college seminary, had more to discern, took 2 years off, and that's when I got my master's in counseling. And in that, a lot of things worked out, but that was the best thing I did to do that. And then went on to theology. So it's not a straight line more than ever, and we have a lot of second career guys now. And that's a very helpful thing, because that brings a lot of experience as well. So it's more about, I think it doesn't change your generations. You got to be open to God's working in your life, open to asking the questions and wrestling with the questions. And then when that happens, you will eventually make some decisions along the way. But it's even to this day, 31 years later almost, you always have to revisit things, and saying yes to certain things, it means saying no to others, and it's a constant journey. It's not just a one-time call kind of thing. You have to continually recommit yourself to it.
Did you think it was going to be a one-time call when you went in? Did you think it was going to be easy?
Well, I never thought it was going to be easy.
Okay. All right. What are some
I
of the
always
things
knew it
you
would
didn't
be fun to
expect?
some degree, but
Yeah.
no, I was in Sister Kara Marie's class not too long ago, and we were talking about this, and I've given this answer for a while now. I am much happier in priesthood than I ever could have imagined. Mm-hmm. But in many ways, it's much more difficult than I ever could have imagined. Now, that's not a negative thing. That to me is an opportunity and a challenge to bring the reality of happiness and working and ministry together, and to be able to continue to try things in different ways, be faithful to who you are, who God calls you to be, but also to accept those difficult times and those challenges to get to a better place, because that's what it's all about for any of us in the Paschal mystery, through suffering, death, and resurrection. So the reality, not to go on theologically, but to get on very practically, is I am much happier, and in some ways it is definitely different, in some ways much more difficult, but that's a positive thing.
Good. So wonderful that you're happy. What do you do for fun? Like, what are those things? What do you have? Some activities?
One activity.
Well, obviously I love to banter.
What is that
No.
activity? What is that activity?
I can't do it.
Facebook now.
Obviously, the one place, and many people know this, that I go where I don't think about anything else, even if I'm not playing well, is golfing. So my go-to reality now is when I have time off is to golf with some of my priest friends, also some of the parishioners or my lay friends, that's a place where like kind of all the stress goes away, and I just like kind of enjoy it for that. I do that. But I also have learned the value. This is going to sound really simplistic, and this goes through learning how to deal with stress in life, is the value of a really good walk, whether it is through a neighborhood where you see people, or alongside a mountain or a creek or whatever. That sense has become much more important to me, in more of a kind of a prayerful dimension, either alone or with others. Those are kind of the two answers I would give. I also still enjoy watching Notre Dame games and other games.
Except when they lose to us.
Yes, definitely. So we'll see what happens coming up on September 3rd.
I won't be at work that day.
Yeah, so I think I would sum that up. And the other thing is, and obviously look at me, I love to eat. And so the value of, there are 3 other pastors that pretty much every other Saturday night we get together. That's a very supportive thing, and a great thing for us, as priests and as friends and people. And also, I enjoy doing that, whether it's at people's houses or out. And I think that's a key piece, that sense of having that balance of friends in ministry and friends outside of ministry, and just being together, because that's where we learn more about who God calls us to be.
Nice. Kylie, how about you? What do you do for fun?
What do I
And
do?
you're going to say you don't have time for fun.
No,
So
I do.
What do you do for fun?
I love to, which was difficult in winter. I love being outdoors and like hiking and.
So let everybody know where you are from.
So I grew up in Dallas, Texas. Technically I was born in New Jersey, but that was 2 years of my life. So bulk of my childhood from 2 to 18 was in Dallas, Texas. And then I did my undergraduate degree in Phoenix, Arizona. So I am used to and love the warmth, and I thrive in the warmth. So because we don't pick like where we go. So when I got told that I was going to Scranton, I was honestly excited. I was like, it's only 2 years. This is what I was talking about. I was like, it's only 2 years. It can't be that bad, like the weather. And I was excited for like fall and some snow and stuff like that. So I will say I really appreciated the fall, like the fall leaves and hiking in the fall and the cool weather. It is much more enjoyable to hike in like 65 than 100, so that was fun. There's definitely a longer stretch of winter than I was expecting. I was telling the office, they were like asking how I was doing with winter, and I think it was maybe February-ish time, and I was like, honestly, around February, I was like, this is fine, it's cold, this is normal. But I told them I'm operating under the assumption that March will be sunny and warm. So then when March and April were not sunny and warm, then I was getting a little antsy. But yeah, so when it's nice outside, I like to hike and be outdoors and do different stuff like that. There's a lot of good parks around here that I've gone to, some really close to my house, or even just like within an hour distance. So I do appreciate that, getting outdoors and kind of being outside in nature and hiking around and stuff like that. I also really like playing volleyball, or like any sports. I always played volleyball in high school and college, so really anything outdoors I do enjoy, kind of being active and stuff like that. Going on runs usually clears my head. So I like to do that. Other than that, like I do like to kind of just come home and relax, or, read a book, have a glass of wine, different things like that to kind of help me wind down from the day. But yeah, a variety of things. Those would probably be the top things that I would say to do in my free time. And it has been fun here just to get to see, like, go and explore different areas and see new things, go to Scranton, kind of stuff like that with my roommates, and get to see what the town has to offer. So that's been fun too.
Nice. Now, do either of you have a question for each other?
Oh, Father Joe's the question, man.
What do you want
Anything.
me?
I don't know.
Anything.
Well, Trish already asked a question that, we'll pursue further as you
Dive
continue to
into.
discern in your life, yes.
Oh gosh.
I would say, you talked about kind of what you learned. I guess I would ask what may have been the most challenging
The
of this past year.
challenging thing of the past year. Great question, Father Joe. I think it was more, I think because it was surprising, made it challenging as well. So I think it was more challenging than I expected to transition and come and work just in a new place in general. And I think it was even challenging because of how much I enjoyed it. Like, if that makes sense. Like, I think having the transition in of itself was challenging, of like leaving the community that I had in college, and coming here and like not knowing anyone, and then still being like very welcomed and like having like a wonderful kind of welcoming experience, and like being able to enter into different ministries, but still I think kind of struggling to like just find the fit in and find the path and kind of like get settled even. And I think that was more challenging than I was expecting. But now looking back at it, like it makes sense. If that's like a natural kind of human way of like, we've been talking about this idea of community, and community takes time to build. So it's kind of expected that you're not just going to move in on day one and have these lifelong friendships already established. So I think that transition in general was just a challenging aspect of like jumping straight in, but still kind of wrestling with this kind of transition process of living in a new state and being in a new environment, a new culture, a new parish, living with new people. Like, everything was just very new in the beginning. So I think that was probably the most challenging part of this experience. Was it was all just very new. Like, nothing was very, I wasn't used to anything that was happening. So I think just that newness and like getting adjusted to that and seeing how things were run here, or seeing what was best ways to approach, and kind of just being on a learning curve for a while was really good and really helpful, and I think really expanded like my abilities and my gifts. But I think that was probably the most challenging part for me, at least.
Your turn. Your turn.
What's your comment back to that?
I had no expectations for that.
What do you think was my most challenging thing?
What do I think?
Yeah.
Well, you identified, we've talked about this and go back and forth about it. You know, one of the things about the ECHO program and about ministry in general is that there always has to be some sense of theology and what we used to call praxis, still do, but where you have to know the theology and why we believe what we do believe, and how the tradition, scripture teaches that, but then also the reality that how does that happen on a regular, everyday basis. And you know, Kylie has always said to me, you know, his theology and his philosophy, you know, I don't want to stay up here, I want to be down here. And that's a great thing, because, I mean, we all need to say that. And I remember different points when I was saying it. But as she was saying that, it was clear to me, especially in adult faith formation, that she's been doing theology from the little bit that she has had so far. When she would do her presentations, it obviously shows and all that. So anyway, I think that was, to me, seeing, I think that in some ways it may not have been directly challenging to you, where that you could do a balance of the theology and the praxis.
Yeah.
And there's a lot that happens in that balance.
Okay, well, thank you guys. So, really quick, we only have a couple more minutes. Are there any words of wisdom that you would like to give to people that are watching that may be thinking about working in their faith as their vocation? So, Father, do you want to?
I have something.
Are you
if
good?
want me to
Okay,
go.
go ahead.
Well, I was thinking when he was talking about seminary, I think what he was saying, I was kind of processing like in my own life. And I think in any vocational call in general, or any job call that you feel, I think we expect, like when we say like God's will for our life, we expect like this one exact thing to happen. And if I make the wrong decision, then I've like screwed up the rest of my life. And like we even see this in like colleges, like you have to decide your major early on, or you're not going to be able to do what you want to do and be successful and all these things. And I think the best piece of advice that I've received, and like you can have, is what he was saying, is to trust, almost like to trust the process of like, you might not know or be 100% sure or have this direct like call, or this like very specific thing, but if you're slowly kind of making these decisions and aligning your life with your faith and like asking the Lord what he wants, that kind of process will eventually lead you to kind of what you're meant to do and what the Lord like desires you to do. But I think to just break away from the mindset that you have to decide now and it has to be this exact thing and you have to do that for the rest of your life, because that can be very paralyzing. If stuff doesn't line up for you, then like you're distraught because kind of like this plan that you thought you had for your life has fallen apart. So I think that would be my piece of advice, is don't get so caught up in picking this specific thing right now, but rather kind of like journeying through and seeing kind of what gifts the Lord has given you, seeing what you like to do, like take that into consideration, like, you know, what are your passions, what do you like to do, and kind of filtering all of that into kind of deciding if like a role in the church would be kind of where you feel called. And then also another thing that he said too was like have other people in your life. Like that was the biggest thing for me. And so I think to make sure you're surrounding yourself with people that are not only kind of involved in their faith, but also just have want the best interests for you and have your best interests in mind, and kind of continue to surround yourself or seek out advice from those people. So it's not just you kind of in your own head making this decision. So those would be my two pieces of advice.
Good advice. Father Joe.
Ditto.
I kind of stole it from
Yeah,
him.
no, that's I'm sitting here going, yes.
Okay,
So.
well, I guess on that note, thank you, Father Joe. Thank you
you.
for Kylie for doing this and starting this whole thing up.
Thank you.
And that's all we have time for today. And thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.
There you go.